When are the review days?
I haven't scheduled them with Diego yet. There will be a review session in class on Monday. But Diego will also be holding some review sessions as well. And I will get with him and figure out when those are gonna be. They'll probably be early next week.
Okay.
And Diego seems to like to schedule things in the late afternoon. So I'm not 100% sure, but I will get with Diego and find out.
Okay.
Other questions? I think Diego always has a review session today on Wednesday.
Oh, really?
Yeah, every Wednesday at 4:30, I think Diego always has a review session.
Cool.
So you can go hang out with Diego today if you want.
Definitely.
Other questions? All right, cool. So, before we move on to our next topic, a little talk to your neighbor thing. Think of your favorite non-animal based food and then categorize it into one of those plant groups that we were talking about on Monday. So figure out what group of plants that food comes from.
Bryophyte, right? Is kelp bryophyte? No, I was gonna say pasta, but
That's just like
grain, yeah. So, like, which, like, what do you mean whenever we're supposed to classify it?
Huh?
Whenever we're supposed to classify it, like, how? What do you mean, like?
Well, what group of plants does it belong to? We talked about a whole bunch of different
Right.
groups of plants. So figure out as detailed as possible what group of plants it belongs to.
Okay. They're a plant, they're a lagoon.
where did they come from?
Watch, I'll do it right. I'll look it up. Do you want to do free, like refried beans?
All right, it's gotten a little bit quieter. So somebody want to volunteer their favorite non-animal food? Sure.
Chocolate cake, chocolate baby. It's not a
Okay, so chocolate. Okay, so chocolate. Chocolate. What kind of plant is chocolate? Anybody know what kind of plant chocolate is? Anyone ever seen chocolate?
Cocoa?
The chocolate plant? It's an angiosperm, correct? It's a type of flowering plant. Any guess as to whether it might be a monocot or a dicot?
I think it's monocot.
It's a dicot.
It's a dicot.
It is. It's a dicot. It's a. And if you actually saw, like a chocolate plant is like a small tree, and the pods actually grow off the side of the tree like this, and the pods are all full of beans. But if you look at the leaves look like this, which is your very typical dicot leaf. So that was a bit of a tough one because not everybody knows what a chocolate plant actually looks like. They don't grow in North America. Other favorite foods? Yeah.
Mangoes.
Mangoes. Okay. What kind of plant is a mango, do you think?
Angiosperm.
Also an angiosperm. And that one's a dead giveaway because a mango is clearly a fruit. And the angiosperms are the only plants that have fruits. And then what do you think, monocot or dicot? They're also a dicot. Yeah. Again, you may not have actually ever seen a mango tree, so it's a bit hard to know unless you've seen the whole plant. But they're actually also a dicot. Any other favorite foods that anyone wants to volunteer? Anybody? Yeah.
I would say it's my favorite food. For food, I was wondering if I might guess that mushrooms are
You are leading me into my next topic. Mushrooms are actually not a plant. Mushrooms are a fungus. Yeah. It would be neither a plant nor an animal. It's a different group of organisms. And so we do eat mushrooms as well. So you actually led me very nicely into our next topic.
super
We
pink
have a
mushroom.
lecture on fungi.
Oh, that's just
I love fungi too, they're really cool. So fungi are their own group. They are not a plant. They are not an animal. They are their own thing. They're actually pretty ecologically important and pretty interesting. So here's a little phylogenetic tree. Fungi are actually a sister taxa of the taxa to which animals belong. So fungi are actually pretty dang closely related to animals. So these are some different groups of fungus here. So these are all different groups of fungus. And then animals here are kind of like an outgroup in this tree. So there's a bunch of different species of fungus. The estimates are that there's about 1.5 million different species of fungus. A lot of them aren't terribly well described. Fungus are a bit challenging to study because they can look quite different in different environmental conditions. So now that we have genetic tools, it's easier to identify things.
Based on the
Before we
tree,
had
fungi
genetic tools, a lot of times we were just looking at it and trying to guess what species things belong to. Fungi can be single cellular or multicellular. There are both within the fungi. And one thing that fungi do really well is that they actually get their nutrients from their surroundings. So they actually digest things that are in their vicinity and then absorb nutrients through their skin. So they're a very interesting creature. The common ancestor of animals and fungi existed about 800 million years ago. So not a terribly long time ago in the grand scheme of things. And then I've got our first quicker question of the day here. So we're looking at this phylogenetic tree. All of these organisms are considered to be fungi. So based on this phylogenetic tree, what term would you use to describe the taxonomic group of fungi? There isn't a D. Okay, good. They press D for a second there, and then change them. All right, click in if you haven't clicked yet. All right, everybody in? Okay. So, animals are not fungi. They're not considered part of fungi. All of these things are considered part of fungi. Where's the common ancestor of the fungi? Based on this tree.
In between animals and fungi.
Right here in the purple, right? Does the group fungi include all descendants of that common ancestor? Yes, it does. So if you go downstream from there, everything that descended from this common ancestor, all of these things are considered to be fungi. So if a group contains the common ancestor and all descendants of that ancestor, what kind of group is it?
Monophyletic.
Monophyletic. So this is a monophyletic group. Most people actually said paraphyletic, maybe people that asked paraphyletic a bunch of times, yes. Monophyletic is a monophyletic group contains the common ancestor and all descendants of that ancestor. A paraphyletic group contains the common ancestor and some, but not all, descendants of that ancestor. So if you said that this ancestor here, if you called this ancestor a fungus, then it would be a paraphyletic group. But because we call this ancestor a fungus, but we don't call this ancestor a fungus, then it's a monophyletic group. That make sense? Yes? Polyphyletic means that the taxonomic group does not include the common ancestor. You're welcome. All right. So let's take a look at some of these fungi. When you're looking at multicellular fungi, and there are unicellular fungi, clearly unicellular fungi are only going to have a single cell. Actually, I'm going to tell a mushroom joke real quick. Mushroom walks into a bar. Bartender says, "We don't serve your kind here." Mushroom says, "Why not? I think fungi." Oh. All right. Anyway, sorry. I have a bunch of really bad mushroom jokes. I don't know why. So multicellular fungi. There are unicellular fungi, but multicellular fungi are usually arranged in these structures that are long, skinny, unicellular extensions called hyphae. So this is an example of a hypha. hypha is singular of hyphae. Thank you, Latin, in this case. So this is a long string of cells. They can branch. They're branching that are going to be like extending through the environment. And generally, these hyphae are divided up into separate cells, but oftentimes there's actually a pore that goes between the cells that allows for the cytoplasm or the liquid within the cell to actually move, to actually flow between cells, which is kind of cool because that allows for nutrients to be distributed quite rapidly throughout the body of the fungus and allows for very rapid growth. So you know, if you've ever been out in the forest like 1 or 2 days after a rainstorm, what do you see? Mushrooms, a lot of times, right? And they just appear out of nowhere 1 or 2 days after a rainstorm. They grow extremely fast when the conditions are right. So that is something that happens, that fungi can actually do, that allows them to take advantage of very short-lived periods of time when the environment is favorable. These hyphae then together form these mats of connected hyphae called mycelia. Mycelium is singular of mycelia, again, thank you, Latin. And these mats can be quite dense and thick. So you can't really see an individual hypha with your naked eyes, but you can see mycelium. So for example, when your bread molds and it gets super fuzzy, that is a mycelium of a whole bunch of hyphae. All the little fuzzes are individual hyphae. Even I have problems with Latin plurals. But you can see that the conglomeration of all of those individual hyphae together, right? Fungi do actually also have cell walls, like plants have cell walls, but plant cell walls are made of cellulose, and fungal cell walls are made of chitin. Chitin is the same compound that's found in the exoskeletons of insects. So it's a structural compound that helps to support the cells. Any questions about this so far? Okay. The most common way that fungi reproduce is through producing spores. These spores can then float on the wind, and there are fungal spores everywhere. I guarantee you. Has anyone ever done an experiment with a petri dish where you like just either leave it open or like touch things and then put it on the petri dish? And you grow a lot of bacteria, but you also usually grow a lot of fungus when you do that. And the fungi look different because they tend to be fuzzy. So fungal spores are all over the place all the time. They can be produced either through asexual reproduction or through sexual reproduction. What's the difference between asexual and sexual reproduction again? Yeah, so asexual reproduction, you have a single parent, you produce offsprings that are clones. Sexual reproduction, you have two parents, they combine their genetic material and you produce offspring that are different from both parents and different from each other. Yes?
So is it a mold of fungus?
A mold is a type of fungus. There's a lot of different types of fungus, but molds are fungus, among other things. I'll do some fungal diversity stuff at the end of this lecture. Any questions about that so far? All right, so let's take a look at reproduction in fungi. A lot of fungi do reproduce asexually most of the time, and so basically you just have this pattern where you have the formation of the mycelium, so there'll be a big structure, mat of hyphae. Eventually, when conditions are favorable or unfavorable, depending on the scenario, that mycelium will then produce spores, so it'll produce these little single cellular structures that then can be dispersed by wind and germinate and form a new mycelium. So this would be an asexual reproductive cycle. They're just making clones of themselves, they're producing a bunch of spores, those spores are settling in new areas and new fungi are growing in. All right? So that's one way that fungi can reproduce. They can also reproduce sexually. And fungi are a little bit interesting because they actually have a separate stage where they are neither haploid nor diploid. So what does haploid mean?
One allele.
One copy of each chromosome. What does diploid mean?
Two.
Two copies of each chromosome. These guys actually have a period in which they're what we call heterokaryotic. So what that means is that they do have two copies of each chromosome, but the two copies are contained in two separate nuclei. So they actually have two nuclei, one that has the chromosomes from one parent. It's not quite so simple as male and female in a fungus. One that has the chromosomes from one parent and one that has the chromosomes from the other parent. All right, so you have your normal growing things. The mycelium are generally haploid, actually. So the as you might call adult fungus is haploid. And then what happens is you've got these hyphae. Usually this is happening underground. You've got these hyphae growing underground, and two individuals will come next to each other, and they'll actually just touch hyphae, and those hyphae will, a cell at the end of those hyphae will fuse. So that's what's happening here. So we have a hypha from one parent here, a hypha from the other parent here. Those two hypha come into contact. One of those cells fuses. They have two nuclei now, one from one parent, one from the other parent, and those cells start to grow and reproduce. All right. So now you've got this structure, has two nuclei. Eventually what happens is you get what we call karyogamy, where the nuclei finally fuse. But generally there's a bit of growth that happens here. And so now you briefly have a diploid stage, and then you go through meiosis and go back to produce your haploid spores, which then go make new fungi again. So it's a bit odd. That make sense? And in the case of something like a fungus or a mushroom, the mushrooms are actually this heterokaryotic phase. So underneath the ground, there are two individual funguses. Their hyphae fuse. Once they fuse, that fusion grows the mushroom. And then karyogamy happens within the mushroom, and then spores are produced by the mushroom, and then it then goes and creates new individual funguses. Does that make sense? So if you like mushrooms, which I do, I think they're delicious. You're eating basically it's basically a sexual structure. It's representing mushroom sex in a physical form, more or less, which is kind of cool. All right. Okay, so nutrition. Mushrooms, all fungus gets their nutrition from secreting digestive enzymes into their surrounding. So when we, as an animal, eat something, we take the thing we want to eat, we put it in our bodies, and then we digest it and absorb it, right? So in our stomachs, we're secreting digestive enzymes into our stomachs that breaks down the food, and then we absorb the food from our stomachs, right? It's internal digestion. These guys have external digestion. They secrete enzymes into their environment, digest things outside the body, and then absorb the digested products through their skin, basically. So it'd be like, if you wanted to eat a sandwich, and you just held the sandwich in your hands and digested the sandwich, and then absorbed the nutrients through your hands. That would be external digestion, all right? I know, it's kind of cool. So in order to get enough nutrition from the environment, they need a very large surface area to volume ratio. So they have to have a lot of surface area in contact with the environment that they're secreting enzymes into. And so having all of those individual hyphae and those big mats of mycelium allow them to digest a lot of area within a particular environment. Fungi also have enzymes that can break down cellulose and lignin. So cellulose is what makes up plant cell walls. It's what we call fiber in our diet. As animals, we do not have an enzyme to break down cellulose, so fiber is not digestible to an animal. Lignin is the compound that makes wood woody, that makes wood hard. So there are fungi that can produce an enzyme that breaks down lignin. This is a lot. If you've ever seen shelf fungus growing out of the side of a dead tree, they're actually getting nutrition from the wood. And there are very, very few other organisms that can actually utilize the energy that's trapped in that lignin. Lignin's very difficult to break down. So it's really important, they're really important organisms for decomposing wood. This is also why you do not want fungus in your house, because they will eat your house. Like literally. I used to live in Virginia, and it's very humid there, and it was a constant battle to keep the fungus from eating our house. It was one thing. We're always eating problems. They're actually, a lot of them are decomposers. They break down dead material from usually plants. So they're breaking down leaf litter, they're breaking down woody structures. But there actually are some carnivorous fungi as well. This is an example of a carnivorous fungus. Up here, I'm actually going to show you a little video. But basically, these are, you can see these little strings are the fungus. These little strings here are hyphae. The yellowish thing, that is a nematode. It's a small worm. And the fungi has these little loops that they can contract. And so they can trap the worm, and then they digest the worm with digested enzymes and consume it. Yeah.
The fungi that attack insects and sort of crawl up trees and stuff, would that be a carnivorous?
That would also be a carnivorous fungus, yeah. So let's see here if I can. I just think this one's particularly cool because they actually they're basically hunting and capturing prey. Whereas the ones that make the insects crawl up and then a spore erupts from the insect's head, that's more of an infection where it's infecting the whole body. But this one is like,
It's really creepy.
they're super creepy.
I watched like National Geographic documentaries and they're on that. It's scary to watch.
Let's see if I can find the right section. This is kind of a long video, and there's a section of it that is the right section. There we go. Do we have any noise? We don't get to hear the scientists talking. Oh, here we go.
Through this ring, then the mechanical stimulation of the
Hold on,
ring
back it up
cells
a little bit.
leads. This ingenious one is the one that uses constricting rings, and these hyphal rings consist of 3 cells. And when a nematode comes along and moves through this ring, then the mechanical stimulation of the ring cells leads these rings to inflate and entrap the nematode. And eventually, hyphae will actually perforate the cuticle of the worm, and the worm will be digested by the fungus.
Wow.
While trap inflation occurs quickly when it's started, there's a delay from the initial contact of
Okay,
the worm.
so
with
that's
the
the
enzyme.
part of this video that, yeah.
Oh, is there a reason why the worm wants to go through?
It's just foraging. It didn't mean to go through. Nematodes aren't super smart. They have a very, very small nervous system. And so basically they have, if you watch this whole video, it's actually all about nematode behavior. And basically they go like this through their environment, and they're just looking for little bits of detritus to eat. They have a genetically determined behavior where if they come into contact with one of these hyphae and they detect it, they actually back up without swinging their head back and forth so they can escape the loop. It's actually pretty cool. You can watch the whole video. It's on the PowerPoint. If you want to watch the whole video, it's kind of neat. All right. Okay, so next clicker question.
Uh-oh.
Based on the information so far that I just presented, would you say that fungi are autotrophic or heterotrophic? Cast your minds back to our discussion of metabolism text.
I think it's hetero. Hetero. What you put?
B.
I just remember saying that to me.
All right, click in if you haven't clicked. I think that might be everybody. Okay. So what does that mean? Autotrophic, heterotrophic? Well, let's just start with autotrophic. What does autotrophic mean?
It's
Make their own food.
Yeah, you make your own food. It literally means self-eater. So you make your own carbon-based molecules. So an autotrophic organism is going to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turn it into organic compounds. A heterotrophic means other eater. So they are going to get their organic compounds from consuming another organism. So what these guys would then be what? Heterotrophic. There are no photosynthetic fungus. None of them are doing any carbon fixation. They're all heterotrophic. They need other organisms to make the organic compounds that they rely on. Okay. All right, so fungi are really, really important in the ecosystem. They're one of the most important decomposers. The two major decomposers in the ecosystem are fungi and bacteria. But fungi really have this advantage of being able to easily digest lignin, and they're pretty much the only things that can do that. So for woody plant debris, fungi really have a big advantage. They can also digest cellulose, so even non-woody plant debris they can get at. They also digest all kinds of other things. Anything that has molded in your fridge is something a fungus can eat. So I've seen moldy everything. There's fungi that can break down pretty much any type of organic matter. In fact, they've even looked into using fungi to break down plastics, because plastics do have carbon-based structures in them, and there may be some fungi that we can use to help keep plastic from being around forever and ever like it is now. So they're trying to use that as a way to deal with some human waste. So they're super important in that regard. They break down these compounds and then they release nutrients into the environment that other organisms like plants can then use to grow. All right. Fungi also often have very beneficial associations with other organisms. So nearly all plants have a mutualistic relationship or a beneficial relationship with some sort of fungal species. These are called mycorrhizae. So mycorrhizae are particular groups of fungus that live in the soil, and they can form this association with plant roots. So this is a cross-section of a plant root. All these little green lines are hyphae from a fungus, and you can see the hyphae are actually penetrating into the tissue of the root. What this does is it greatly increases the surface area of the root. That allows the plant to absorb, the fungus will absorb and then transfer to the plant minerals and trace nutrients and water that is in the soil and transfer that into the plant cells. So this is very beneficial for the plant. What do you think the fungus gets out of this?
substrate.
It has kind of a safe place to live. What can plants do that fungus can't do?
Photosynthesize.
Photosynthesis. So plants can fix carbon and make organic compounds. So basically, the plant feeds the fungus. It gives organic compounds to the fungus. The fungus now has the food that it needs to survive, and it supplies the plant with the nutrients that the plant needs. And it makes plants can grow without these mycorrhizae, but they definitely do not grow as well. So this is an example of rosemary plants. This one, the seeds were sterilized, the soil was sterilized, so it's growing in a sterile soil with no fungi living in the soil. This is a rosemary growing with normal soil that has those mycorrhizal fungi in it. And you can see that this plant is growing faster. See how much greener it is? This one's kind of yellow. This is a nutrient deficient plant. It's not being able to, even though it's growing in the exact same soil, in the exact same type of soil, and this soil was just sterilized. That's the only thing that's different about the soil, is it was sterile soil. It's not able to get as many nutrients out of that soil as this plant is. That make sense?
I got a question.
Yeah.
So is it possible that, we talked about like the cells, how the way the cells got all their organs inside of them was other cells just, coming in there and then
Yeah.
eventually just always being in there? Could that happen the same thing with like that fungi could just like evolve with those plants and eventually it's naturally grown with them?
Yeah, I mean, it could. These guys, they're almost always together, so it's pretty close to that already. Yeah, clearly you can have a seed from a rosemary and it doesn't already have the fungus with it, right? Let me show you an example of an even closer association between a fungus and something else, and that's lichen. So lichens are also an association between a fungus and a photosynthetic partner. In this case, it's usually an algae or a cyanobacteria. These are always found together. And they're basically living in the exact same place. And if you look at it, these algal cells are completely embedded within the body of the fungus. So this is something that's much more like what you were just asking. These are a much tighter association. And algae lichens have a similar strategy here, where the photosynthetic partner is producing food for the fungus. And in this case, the fungus is giving the photosynthetic partner a nice place to live. And I have a bad joke about that, or at least a mnemonic about this one. Alice algae and Freddy fungus took a liking to each other, and the relationship has been on the rocks ever since. No? Okay. I don't know why I have so many bad mushroom puns, but I do. So the lichens are actually really cool because they have this relationship. They're able to colonize really, really harsh locations where virtually nothing else can grow. So they're able to colonize areas without soil. So if you would go up, into the mountains and you look at a rock on the side of the mountain, super exposed, wind, rain, sun, really harsh conditions, no soil, and there, you can still find lichens growing on the side of that. The fungus is very resilient and is able to survive and hold on to the side of that rock. And because the fungi have some of these very strong enzymes, they're actually able to slowly, gradually break down the rock and get mineral content from the rock. So they're actually digesting the rock very slowly. And because they have this photosynthetic partner that's living within them, that photosynthetic partner is taking sunlight energy and making food. So lichens, because they live in such extreme environments, tend to grow very, very slowly. So a lichen of this size could be 50 years old. They do not grow quickly at all. It's very difficult to survive in these conditions, but they do help to weather rock and actually create soil. So it's kind of, they're pretty important organisms. Questions about that? Okay, so those are some beneficial fungi. There are also harmful fungi. A number of different fungus can infect food resources. I'm sure this has happened to you in your kitchen. Fungus is one of the things that spoils food more than any other. Well, bacteria also spoils food as well, but fungus spoils a lot of food too. And they do infect some food crops. So have you guys ever heard of ergotism? Maybe a few people have. This is a fungal disease that infects grain crops. And the fungus actually will grow within the grain heads. So these are seed. This is, I think, rye, and these are seeds that have been infected with this fungus. The fungus produces a compound that causes psychiatric breaks, basically. It makes people act crazy. Historically, one of the hypotheses for one of the triggers of the Salem witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts, was that there was an infection of this ergot fungus in the grain supplies of the colony, and it made people go into seizures, it made people speak in tongues and do all kinds of other crazy things, and because we didn't understand science at the time, we blamed it on witches. And that is one of the hypotheses for what triggered the witch trials, yeah.
Doesn't it turn red at red color?
I do not know what color it turns bread, but it's something that can, like if you make bread with that grain, baking bread doesn't eliminate the toxins, so you can still be poisoned from the bread. So that's one one example. Another example, Aspergillus flavus is a particular species of fungus that grows on peanut shells underground, because peanuts are produced underground. Remember I told you guys about the extremely carcinogenic compounds in peanut butter when we were talking about mutation? That's the fungus that produces aflatoxin, which is the most carcinogenic chemical known to man, which is present in very tiny amounts in peanut butter because it's growing on the peanut shells and we don't have a mechanical process to really eliminate it entirely. So whenever you eat peanut butter, you're getting very tiny amounts of aflatoxin. So moderation, people. I wouldn't eat peanut, well, there's a lot of reasons not to eat peanut butter every single day of your life, but that might be one of them. Okay. There's also fungal diseases that affect humans. So for example, athlete's foot, ringworm, yeast infections, and nail fungus are all examples of fungal diseases that you may have heard of. And these fungal diseases can be extremely difficult to treat. If you've ever gotten a fungal disease, you may know that you're given like an antifungal ointment. Let's say you get ringworm. They give you an antifungal ointment. They tell you to use it for like a month, right? It's a long treatment period to really kill off these fungi. Why do you think that is? Why can't we kill them quickly and easily?
They grow quickly.
They're feeding on a host like us, but we can kill bacteria pretty quickly and easily. Why are fungus harder to kill than bacteria? Yeah, so can bacteria. Yeah, they do have sexual reproduction and prokaryotes don't. That is a difference. But because prokaryotes have horizontal gene transfer, they're also able to evolve very quickly. Do you guys remember what the sister group of fungus was?
Animals.
Not plants, not algae, animals. So animals are closely related to plants. If you have a drug that kills fungus very effectively, what is it probably also likely going to kill?
Karyotic cells.
Animals, right? So a lot of things that are toxic to fungus is also toxic to animals. And you can't treat yourself for a fungal disease with something that also kills you, right? That's not an effective way to treat yourself. So because of that, the compounds that we use to treat fungi, usually we have to take them in small doses because they can potentially be toxic to animals, and so they work more slowly, and they're just really, really tricky to treat because of that. Okay. All right, so we're now going to go into a little bit of fungal diversity here. So here's our phylogenetic tree of the fungi. This is still a work in progress. There's been substantial revision of the fungal phylogenetic tree as we get more information, and there may be more additional revision, but this is our current breakdown of the fungal groups. So I'm going to be talking about mostly four of these different groups: the chytrids, the zygomycota, the basidiomycota, and the ascomycota. I'm not really going to talk about the glomerulomycota because they're the least, as you can see, they're the least common, and I'll make you know everything. But we're going to talk about some of these different groups of organisms. So we'll start with the chytrids. Chytrids are mainly aquatic. They mostly live in aquatic environments. They're mainly unicellular. Most of them are decomposers, but there are some really important chytrid species that cause disease, and particularly it's really important for amphibians. Right now there is a chytrid fungus that is infesting amphibian populations and causing mass die-offs among frogs and salamanders, and has caused the extinction of several species already. It's a really big problem in the tropics. It's spreading very rapidly, and it's a major conservation concern. So I have a little video about this one too.
We have a group of vertebrates, the amphibians, that evolved 360 million years ago. They've been incredibly successful. They've made it through mass extinction events, and better than many other vertebrates. I'm thinking in particular of things like dinosaurs. Amphibians today are really, really in bad shape. I mean, just in the last couple of decades, we've lost hundreds of species, probably extinct, and we're talking about 40% of the species that are known are probably going to disappear in my lifetime. The damage is substantial. It's more than substantial, it's catastrophic.
One of the causes of worldwide amphibian decline is a fungus called chytrid, or BD.
So these are these microscopic fungi that live in water. It infects the skin of amphibians, so it's a skin disease. And for amphibians, unlike mammals and other vertebrates, the skin is incredibly important as an organ. They breathe through their skin. Many amphibians don't even have lungs. They breathe right through their skin. And they can breathe underwater, they can breathe on land. They exchange electrolytes through their skin. So their skin is a really important organ. And what this fungus does is it basically disrupts that organ completely. It spreads over the entire skin of the animal and causes complete skin dysfunction, which eventually leads to mortality.
It's causing such massive declines all over the world, and it's just really important to understand more about BD disease dynamics and where it has spread to and where it may be causing new threats to try and conserve some of these amphibians that are threatened.
Vance, Sonia, and Dave Blackburn are in a race to stop BD. They start by looking into the past.
Because our preserved frogs in our collections still have skin, we can actually still screen those old specimens, even things that have been sitting here for 100 years, to know whether or not that specimen collected in that place at that time was infected by the pathogen.
The collections here are incredibly important because we can go back in time and do a retrospective analysis of where did this come from.
The scientists are also looking for clues to understand how some species survive BD.
The really interesting thing about this pathogen is that it doesn't affect all species equally.
Some species seem to really be affected by it, terribly affected by it. Some species seem to tolerate it, they get infected, and in some cases the infection is clear, right? So the question is, why?
How are they doing it? You know, is there some sort of environmental reason that the place that they live is not good for the fungus? Or is it that they're able to fight off the fungus themselves through their immune system? Or is it something else? Is it that some of them might have microbes that live, symbiotes that live on their skin that are beneficial, that protect them from these pathogens?
Sonia and Dave are looking at the microbes that live on African frogs, using swabs that Dave brought back from a recent trip to Cameroon.
I'm hoping to be able to identify groups of microbes that have the potential to have antifungal properties and could protect from BD that may be entering new populations.
Vance and his colleagues have been testing this out by bathing frogs in a microbial bath in the Sierras to help stop BD there.
What we want to do is try to sort of help out those populations by sort of bumping up their defenses, their symbiotic defenses in this case, against this invading pathogen. And we've been able to do it in a couple of cases in the Sierra Nevada. How can we change an outbreak that normally would lead to extinction and then sort of switch it towards something where we might be able to get survival of the host? I want these amphibians to be around in the future. These really cool frogs and salamanders that are part of what makes our world so interesting.
All right. So they've actually extended this study, and last year they actually did some of those microbial baths for some of the boreal toads that live in Colorado. So it's something that they've been expanding, and it does seem to be helping the frogs to fight off the disease, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so that's chytrids. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay, Zygomycota, the next group. Zygomycota is like a super diverse group with a lot of different things in it. They're still really working out the evolutionary relationships between the different organisms in the Zygomycota. It's probably not a monophyletic group, so that probably means that we're going to change the name of it in the